Hello and welcome to the CEC Report for June 27th. I'm Elisa Barwick and with me is Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Elisa.
This week's show we're going to be looking at we're headed for fascism, whoever our Prime Minister is. The bankers' Goosestep, bail-in, and Brits run US spy caper for blackmail. Now, yet again, Australians awoke this morning to a new Prime Minister without an election occurring. So there are implications, obviously, of this. The reasons for it are probably more interesting, and the most interesting thing, I think, was such a massive bloodletting of high-level cabinet officials, a number not running again in the coming election and so forth, and such tumult does not come in a good economic period when the people are happy and settled. So what I want to situate this in is the global context today, because EIR and LaRouche PAC have just put out a statement basically saying that there's a major global push for fascist dictatorship underway. And this is occurring precisely because the financial system has reached a breakpoint, a point of no return. We have put together this statement based on three policy documents that have been issued, two policy documents and a Financial Times article in the last week or so. The first was a JP Morgan report, which was entitled The Euro Area Adjustment, About Halfway There. So this JP Morgan report basically says that we're about halfway progressed in what we have to do with the austerity measures that we're implementing in Europe to get the debt reined in and to get Europe back under control. But the reason they state that we're only halfway there is that there are constitutional issues that they're trying to grapple with, mainly because they say that the constitutions and political settlements in the southern periphery, put in place in the aftermath of the fall of fascism, have a number of features which appear to be unsuited to further integration in the region.
In other words, they're spitting chips at Germany and Italy. Now, these are the two governments that had fascist dictatorships in the 30s, right? And they've changed their constitution to stop that from happening again. But the same bankers that put Hitler and Mussolini into power are now wanting to run the same fascist bankers' dictatorship on Germany and Italy, and I find it very difficult. And when you read this report, Elisa, you read between the lines, you can see the spit sort of coming off the page. They're furiously, trying to push this this fascist dictatorship through, and that's why they say they're only halfway there.
Yeah, and they say, that there's too much democracy, there's constitutional protection of labour rights, there's a right for people to protest unwelcome changes. These are literally the words that they use.
All the things that sovereign nation states should have is what they're objecting to. So This is actually an attack on the sovereignty of nations, and what we've seen under the Maastricht Treaty, the Eurozone, is literally the destruction of a lot of the national sovereignty principles.
And that hysteria of JP Morgan can be seen in another incident in the last week where our regular viewers may be aware that in the United States, GlassSteagall is gaining a lot of momentum. A number of state legislatures, I believe it's 21 now, have actually called for GlassSteagall to be tabled in the Congress. So they've literally written to the Congress requesting this, demanding this. And this came up in Delaware. There was a hearing, and it was an unofficial hearing to discuss the question of GlassSteagall on June the 20th. Now, it was quite hilarious because there were half a dozen bank lobbyists in the room. A local bank lobbyist from Delaware, which is a big financial state and district, said that it would be inadvisable for the state legislature to endorse GlassSteagall. A JP Morgan representative jumped up then and he said it would be very unadvisable for Delaware, of all states, to pass this resolution at this time.
So they did this in their own name. Everyone knew that this was JP Morgan going to a state legislator saying, you will not implement GlassSteagall. Because what does that mean? Because GlassSteagall means a separation of the commercial banking system, where you have a legitimate banking system, but that doesn't mean the speculative side of the banking system. That doesn't mean the investment houses, it doesn't mean the stockbroking houses, it doesn't mean the insurance agencies. Under Glass-Steagall in 1933, all of that was separated out under Roosevelt, under this Glass-Steagall principle. So what JP Morgan is reacting to is this grassroots, very powerful grassroots movement that is saying, we've had enough, we don't want this anymore, and they can see themselves literally shrivelling up and dying, because under Glass-Steagall, as LaRouche has pointed out, what we intend to do is protect the legitimate industry and the banking, commercial industry, because we need it, but everything else can basically go off, shrivel up and die. And this is a death knell in the sense to the British Empire, to its monetary and financial system, and that's what JP Morgan actually are reacting to. So they're not reacting out of a position of strength.
No.
They're actually coming back and sort of like biting the legislators to say, don't you bring this in because we're going to get destroyed.
Yeah.
I.e. our banking system, it's corrupt, it's bankrupt, it's full of debt, it's going to get destroyed if you go ahead with this because of the motion that's happening in the United States.
They don't like revealing their hand in this way, but
No.
they've come to a point where there's no choice. Now, the second policy statement that was issued this week is the annual report of the Bank of International Settlements. Now, that report called for an end to quantitative easing, but basically saying that instead we have to go full scale ahead with the bail-in measures, whereby the depositors are looted to prop up the banks, together in tandem with brutal austerity policies. And then the third document that I cited was a Financial Times article by Wolfgang Munchkow, who has said that basically the European debt is massive, it's unsustainable, the debt on the books of the banks is hidden, there's a lot more than what you think there is, this can't be paid, and there's going to be a massive default. So the statement that LaRouche put out about this, I wanted to quote from, and you can get this on our website, because what LaRouche said is that we're in a situation where certain people are now saying that the debt is unpayable and we're going to pull the plug on it. The intent of pulling the plug now is to be able to control the process of determining who are the winners and who are the losers. And the big loser is intended to be the United States. And the statement goes through how this $85 billion a month that the US Federal Reserve is pumping out in quantitative easing, over half of it's going into Europe. So they're racking up this massive balance sheet of over $4 trillion, and they're just overextending themselves, which if the plug is pulled, the US goes. So the statement continues, so the whole point is a faction in the British oligarchy has announced its intention to pull the plug on the debt bubble and to bankrupt and bring down the United States as an integral part of what they plan to do, which is a drive towards outright fascism. Now, what LaRouche said we have to do to intervene in this is to pull the plug on them before they can pull it on us, and to basically have the United States declare and to call in all of the unpayable debt that they've lent out into Europe and into London.
Which is about $4 trillion. That's, I mean, that's the estimate is $4 trillion just to into European banks. Huge amount of quantitative easing.
And LaRouche had spoken about this back in February, hadn't he, Craig?
Yeah, well, that's the important part, I think, is because this is not unforeseen by us, but what's actually been confirmed is the Financial Times article saying exactly what LaRouche said back in February, actually the February the 15th in a webcast. Now, we published this actually, 250,000 copies in this paper, right, which people can get a copy of if they want to look on our website or write in for it. But look, I'll just read what LaRouche said so people get a real clear sense of where we're heading here. He said in this 15th of February webcast, international webcast, he said that the oligarchy is well aware that the present policy of monetary bailouts called qualitative easing, that's hyperinflationary monetary printing, could never possibly work, right? And then he goes on to say very specifically, they will not try and bail out Ben Bernanke, who's the head of the Federal Reserve, and his operation. They'll do something much nastier. They would dump Ben Bernanke, dump the existing financial system itself, ignore the system they cancelled and put in their own new system. And what happens in a case like this? The amount of outstanding debt, Mr. LaRouche says, on account of this bailout system, the monetary system, the financial easing and the monetary easing has got to be cancelled, right? So there will be no such money available. There will be no such reserves. What will happen will be that an international cabal will create a new system of money which will be much smaller, much more feasibly handled than the present one. What will happen to all those people who are excluded from the use of this limited quantity of money? They will starve to death. Look at Cyprus, right? And you look at the model, which we're going to talk about, I think, in the next segment, about this question of bail-in and how the financial oligarchy intends to try and save some of the biggest financial institutions around the world at the expense of letting a lot of other institutions go broke and bankrupt. You can see that what LaRouche is now talking about a strategic intervention into saving the United States is a crucial, it's actually going to be a life-saving issue right now for both the United States and for Australia. We're intimately tied into the global financial system. We have $1.2 trillion of overseas debt. We've seen the Australian dollar fall, right, because what's happening is the quantitative easing is finishing. Interest rates are rising in other parts of the world, so the carry trade that Australia is involved in is collapsing. So, we're not immune from what's taking place in other parts of the world.
And it might be the pot calling the kettle black, but Wayne Swan was correct when he said if you get Tony Abbott, you're going to get European-style austerity policies. But that's the case, that will be the case, regardless of who we have, because it's going to be dictated by the global financial crisis and the international Freemasonry of central bankers, as you've often referred to them. Now, if you think this idea of a dictatorship is pretty way out there, a financial, dictatorship or fascism, have a look at our CEC New Citizen, which you'll see on the screen, which some years ago we documented the case that there was a fascist military coup planned against the Scullin-Theodore government. This was in the period when they were acting against the banks, when Jack Lang cancelled the debts to Britain, and the same thing was going on with a planned military coup against Franklin Roosevelt in the United States, which was revealed by Smedley Butler back in 1934. So look that up.
That coup was run by JP Morgan back then.
Exactly, that's right. We didn't have time to go into that. We've run out of time for this segment. However, have a look at the website. Now, in the next segment, we will discuss the bankers' Goosestep bail-in. Welcome back to the CEC Report. The bankers' Goosestep bail-in. Now, we've been on a campaign to stop Cyprus-style bail-in coming to Australia for several weeks now, Craig. Do you want to give a bit of a roundup of what we're actually looking at here?
Well, I want to start top down here to say that the bail-in process that we're seeing in Cyprus is the model for the world. And when people say to us, oh no, look, a bail-in's not going to come to Australia, they've got to stop kidding themselves because it's already been adopted in a number of countries. I mean, Switzerland, Spain and the United States have it legislated right now. I believe Japan has passed in their upper house in order to be able to do this. Canada is talking about putting it into legislation. New Zealand is extremely well advanced, and we've heard that Australia has legislation in train for bail-in and for some of the other key attribute measures of the Financial Stability Board of the Bank of International Settlements. So the point, Elisa, is that what is this bail-in? Well, look at Cyprus. The bail-in in Cyprus was where they literally froze people's accounts. They took a large amount of those accounts and basically converted them into shares, right? And that's what the bail-in is. It's to take the liabilities out of the banks and basically get rid of that liability at the cost of depositors. Now, here in Australia, the point is that people like Glenn Stevens from the Reserve Bank is one of the on the steering committee of the Financial Stability Board, right? You have had APRA talk about the need to implement key attributes from the Financial Stability Board, but the most important thing that recently we come across is this idea of legislation in train. So we've been literally turning Canberra on its head in the last week. We've had people up there full-time deployed to find out where this legislation is. Because if they're saying legislation exists, we want to find out where it exists because it is going to come to Australia. This is the only way that the big so-called too big to fail banks, of which our big four are part of this, and that's also recognised by the Financial Stability Board, that our banks, our four too big to fail banks, are going to need the sorts of powers required like bail-in. Now, there's a lot of hoopla about this, right? A lot of denial. It could never come to Australia. But this is a top-down directive from the central bank of all central banks, the Bank of International Settlements. We've been in lockstep with the City of London. for 100 years. You've seen the history of the fights we've had, like people like Jack Lang, John Curtin, Ted Theodore and so forth, about the finance of the City of London. You know, you can look at this right throughout history. So this issue of bail-in is coming to Australia, and people better wake up to that. I mean, you've had a lot of people like Joe Hockey, for example. You might want to say a few things about him, but you know, they try and placate people by saying, no, we've got the strongest banking system in the world. We're being lauded by the IMF that our banking system is so strong and so forth. This is the same government, like Julia Gillard, that says, you know, no one could foresee the global financial crisis. Yet we were forecasting that years, with Mr LaRouche, years before it actually happened.
Yeah, and Joe Hockey in 2007 wrote a letter to one of our CEC supporters saying, I disagree vehemently with your analysis that the world is facing a collapse of financial markets. So when he came out in response to his colleagues in the Parliament this week, insisting that, oh no, our banks are in great shape, we would never need this kind of Cyprus-style bail-in measure, rah, rah, rah. I mean, we think they doth protest too much.
Well, that's the point. So, and we've been, like I said, this massive campaign, and look, every aspect of APRA, Reserve Bank, they know that we're saying to them, you guys intend to bring in bail-in. Now, we aren't privy to the secret meetings that will be going on behind the scenes to find out what's actually in place. I bet there's stacks of documents discussing this that are not made public, because this is the nature of this secret cabal, which I've referred to constantly as the international Freemasonry of central bankers. This is a unique club of high-level bankers that make decisions that literally run government. And that's what you see in this country. The change of government is a function of the financial collapse globally. And you've got Kevin Rudd coming in as a Prime Minister. We wrote an article about him in this edition of the New Citizen, you know, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, Kevin 007, and go through his curriculum vitae. Actually, we couldn't go through it all because there's big gaps in it, which is the point,
which is what makes it more suspicious.
Right, but the point is that here we are, we've done a full circle back to, you know, Kevin 007, and this should be very intriguing for people to look at. Plus also, you know, you look at the perspective of a Liberal government coming to power with Joe Hockey as Treasurer. I mean, it's quite possible that we could have a complete sweep of both houses, and this bail-in measure will just be adopted wholesale very quickly, if not beforehand. Yeah,
well, it's very suspicious that there's not a sign, not a whiff of any actual legislation. No parliamentarian seems to know anything about its existence, and yet here's the FSB in official documents saying legislation is in train, and a number of experts have told us that that means it's written legislation, it's probably passed policy committee, and yet there's no sign of it.
Well, that's, and the other thing is though, we've been told by insiders, you know, if this legislation, this is the sort of thing that people get hung by from lampposts over. I mean, stealing people's deposits out of banks in our country. I mean, this is the end of this is an end game in the
Exactly.
sense.
So it's probably all there ready to go, sitting in a drawer somewhere, and it'll be whipped out as soon as you get a major banking crisis take place in this country. They'll have all the numbers to just ram it through, and before we know it, we won't have a choice. But if we continue our campaign and we make sure that the politicians and the citizenry are aware of it, that they're harassing their MPs about it, which is great, and we had one MP this week who expressed concern over the number of rumours and the number of phone calls and contacts. In fact, a number of MPs were commenting to us that they've had a lot of contacts regarding this subject. So we've got to keep that up. You can go to the website and look at our bail-in page for details. Now, in our next segment, we're going to look at Brits run US spy caper for blackmail. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Brits run US spy caper for blackmail. Now, we've been hearing a lot about this NSA spy scandal in the United States recently, particularly with the whistleblower Edward Snowden being on the run. He was in Hong Kong. As far as I know, he's still stuck in some airport in Russia at the moment, although the news has been eclipsed by the new Prime Minister. Now, this whistleblower, he of course revealed that there were millions of Americans being spied on, their phone calls and so forth, their electronic communications. But another article came out from The Guardian, who'd been publishing these stories initially, on June the 21st, referring to the British version of the NSA, the GCHQ, General Communications Headquarters, and that according to this article, the GCHQ is the senior partner in this, and that basically the NSA is just following their lead. And this GCHQ program depends literally upon probes attached to some 200 transatlantic fibre optic cables that come ashore in Britain. So they're tapping into all this. Most of the information, the report says, that is extracted is content of emails, content of phone calls and so forth. So this is all able to be looked at. Now, there were scandals that have come out in the last week about how participants at the G20 forum in 2009 were spied upon at internet cafes, and also in the last week it's come out again, which came out at the time, that in 2003 there was a Bush government email directed into the GCHQ in Britain asking for dirt to be dug up on the swing states, the smaller countries on the UN Security Council, in order to be able to pressure them to go with the Iraq War. So, you know, this is a big deal. In the United States, there's another whistleblower by the name of Russ Tice from the NSA, and he's come out saying that in the United States, the people that were targeted mostly by these programs were high-level people. They were government officials, including the senators, representatives, House of Representatives members and their staff, even down to the district level, military officers, judges. These were the kinds of people that were being targeted. And the interviewer that interviewed this Russ Tice on a web program, he said, look, this creates the basis and the potential for massive blackmail. The lady who revealed the email in 2003 from the Bush administration regarding the Iraq War, she said the same thing. This could be used to blackmail or bribe the UN delegates. And of course, one of the things we've found in recent times is that GlassSteagall, we keep getting extremely close. We keep getting a massive momentum for GlassSteagall in the United States, and suddenly you hit all the brick walls. And it seems that this is the kind of thing that blackmail would be being probably used for.
Well, this is the dirty tricks campaigns of the secret government, you might say. I mean, look, we've been talking a lot about 9/11 in the past. You know, this could not have been done with high-level coercion amongst high-level ranking military officials and government. I mean, there's a secret apparatus that is intent on maintaining control of its financial and monetary system over the entire US government and over any other government that intends to try and change it. So it's quite lawful that you'll find that these police state operations and apparatchiks and so forth need to have these sorts of powers to make sure that they can head off any direction that might mean strengthening of the nation state.
All justified by 9/11, supposedly.
Supposedly, yeah, a lot of this stuff, the terror laws in Australia and everything was justified by the 9/11 incident, and this is to accelerate the takedown of sovereign nation states to destroy more and more sovereignty. So, I mean, there's a lot more of these whistleblowers out there than we might think.
Yep.
A lot of them are being targeted for being whistleblowers. So, you know, obviously this issue is not going to go away whilst we have someone like Obama in the White House.
And he could be brought down over this and various other scandals that are mounting.
There's so much stuff happening in the background now because of these scandals that, if they're brought to light, could bring Obama down. I mean, that wouldn't be without...
No, and it's all part and parcel of the drive globally for a fascist dictatorship, given that the financial system is now in its last hours that we've discussed in the program. Now, we've run out of time for today. Thanks for tuning in, and join us again next week for the CEC Report.